Castlevania Nocturne could have been the perfect sequel to the original Castlevania, but unfortunately it's not. And what happened to it is unfortunate given that it really could have been the perfect sequel. So I thought it would be kind of cool for us to go over A, what actually happened to it, and B, how it could have been the perfect successor to a series that might very well be one of the best on Netflix currently or ever. So Castlevania Nocturne is technically listed as an indirect sequel to the original Castlevania, which is fair. It's a couple hundred years later, so you don't have that same level of character connection, which is fine. I mean, I think when they did that, they were really hoping to exploit the fact that A, the games do have the lineage factor, so you don't need to set it so directly right after it, but also they were hoping to avoid any comparisons to the original at all, which was foolish because clearly as an audience we were always going to compare it to the original, so they were kind of going to have no way out on that no matter what they did. Unfortunately though for them, it wasn't just moving the era that it happened to form a disconnect from its original. Part of the issue is that Nocturne changes so much of the world and storytelling style that in many ways, while it is still clearly a Castlevania product, you think it would have been a side spin-off by a different studio rather than some of the original creators. Of course, keeping that in mind, this is not written by the original writing team. This is pretty much an all-new productions team with only a few members of that original team coming back. I think that did play a large difference, and it's really noticeable in this series. I have heard that we are going to get more actors, at least coming back in the next season, and hopefully their influence. And if the studio team were smart, they would invite some of the other creative aspects back. But for right now, we'll just settle with what we can get. In terms of everything, this series was not nearly as good as its original, and to be honest, I don't think it was very good as a series on its own anyway. So let's break that down. As a sequel, even though it is a direct sequel, this series shares very few of the hallmarks of the original series. There's not even really a good application of the stuff that is left over. Obviously, there are currently only one returning character, and even with all the stuff in this series, the likelihood we'd get a good return of the majority of the cast is impossible because of the severe time displacement. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. So we are left with a rather limited returning cast, which is fine. You can cover some stuff in flashbacks or archives or whatever, but the big issue tends to be that the new characters don't hold up against those old characters because they're not really given proper stories. But in regards to that, the things that do make comebacks are the aspects of vampires being around. I kind of think that would have to be around, so they don't really get points for that. The aspects of magic are still there, but as I've discussed in previous videos, they altered them so heavily that it's borderline not even worth talking about. Magic has been so distorted by this show that it's not the interesting thing that it used to be. And unfortunately, I would happen to think that one of the biggest aspects of this series that would be quite useful to have would be, I don't know, a castle? I mean, it doesn't have to be Dracula's Castlevania, but it did have to be a castle, and there is no castle in this at all, except for, unless you're counting, a very brief flashback early in the series. So, in terms of being a sequel, there isn't actually all that much that ties into Castlevania. And to be perfectly honest, if you just sanded off the few elements we've talked about, you could pass it off as an unrelated show. But even if it was an unrelated show, I mean, surely that doesn't mean it should be automatically disqualified. What if it was good in its own right? It wasn't. It wasn't. I do enjoy watching this show because I enjoy getting to watch Alucard come back. But if I'm being blatantly honest, there are a few good aspects, but none of them really center around the main storyline. Because this show is so discordantly unfocused, it has a very hard time prioritizing what it needs to do. Characters no longer take center stage, a facet that made the original Castlevania very enjoyable. The few characters that do have well fleshed out stories, or at least implied stories, are few and far between, and unfortunately not usually part of the main center. And when they are the center, the show doesn't quite know what to do with them. So it kind of doesn't really hold up as its own show. Even if I didn't count it as a Castlevania show, which does lower its points even more, it would still be mediocre. It's not absolutely terrible. I've seen worse, but it's not good either. Like, you can watch it, you can put it on in the background. Animation's fantastic in it. I'll give it that. It's kind of the one thing. Although even I will admit, I didn't care much for the facial redesigns in this. I just felt they looked really weird and didn't work for most of the characters. Like in the original series, they clearly went more anime. I think with this, they tried to incorporate more of the artistic, like French designs from some of the games that this is based on, like Rondo of Blood. It didn't blend particularly well. So let's talk about it as a sequel and what we could have done to fix it. So, in terms of fixing this series, I don't want to add in more pieces because I'd really like to just take basically what they had for this and kind of work with that as the material. Because it would be very easy to just say, well, let's make an entirely new show. But no. And I think the greatest way to fix this series is by placing the emphasis back on character. So, the first way I genuinely think you do that is by admitting that a lot of the characters in this are extremely weak. As a matter of fact, the only character that doesn't necessarily need retooling, just needs to be fitted better into the story, is Annette. And possibly Orlok, but we'll get to that. So that means that we are going to have to take Richter and Maria in particular, as well as Elizabeth Bathory, and rework them to make them interesting. I think that the simplest way to do this is give Richter and Maria their own episodes. The first 3 episodes of this series should have been 3 separate storylines. Richter's, Maria's, and Annette's. Annette's backstory pretty much is the same. We just get to cut out the framework of what happened. We keep Richter as, I basically would take the storyline of what happens later, where Richter's on his own at the bar and stuff. And I would not necessarily introduce Jost yet, but I would take Richter and have him be this kind of disgruntled vampire hunter somewhere along the lines of, his great ancestor, because Trevor was a great character, and I think you'd make Richter more of a folk hero than a Geralt-style grungy hero, which I think is fine. It plays more to his personality. And you just kind of have that be, and then you'll have him, again, slay a vampire in the bar. Like I said, we're not introducing Jost this early. And he basically finds out that something is coming, so he sets off on his journey. I think then the next episode, we pick up with Maria and her mother, who is a speaker. Maria gets a bit more of an explanation as to what her power is, something that's actually not done in the series. I had to read the wiki to find out what it was based on. So we find out, more about her leading her revolution, why she wants to do that, because as much as we, state the idea of, well, everybody should be treated equal and fairly, that's not actually a character motivation, that's just basic humanity. Give her a more closely tied reason as to why she wants to help people and wants the revolution to come. Even though specifically the revolution does not include women, you may have noticed fraternity, it's not sorority, so give her a very strong reason for doing that. And I would, again, tie the vampire attacks into her town into it, forcing her into this. And then Annette's gets to be the same with essentially, basically the illustration is that would be a current story, not necessarily a flashback. And she basically, her high priestess still has the vision and sends her and Edward out on the mission to go and help them. I'm perfectly fine with that. If anything, these 3 characters having 3 different stories and coming together sounds pretty awesome. Plus, because they all got their own setup episodes, they get to show off what they can do, and they come off as interesting. Plus, it gives us a bit better reason for why there might be tension in the 4th episode. And I do think you should also introduce Elizabeth Bathory in the 4th episode. Introducing her in 6 is just too close to the end. She doesn't have enough time to get character development or character interaction. And I'm going to hesitantly put a spot in this. Like I said, I didn't want to really add anything of my own creation into this. I just wanted to work with what we had. So I think that much like what I said with Maria and, Richter taking things that are there or implied to be there that we might get next season, give her a motivation. I don't really care what it is, but she has to have a motivation. And this generic, she's somehow a reincarnated goddess, but it isn't explained, needs to be better elaborated on. I need more build-up centered around that. Ideally, I'd do that in the first of the 3 episodes, but then I do more of it as we saw more of her 4th episode onwards. Fundamentally, I'm still okay with kind of Edward's storyline of getting killed, turned into a night creature. That has very interesting premise. I'm fine with that happening in the 4th episode. I also think that should maybe be the catalyst of Elizabeth Foy is the one that kills him, because that gives us a stronger connection to dislike her as the villain. And I think it also gives us a better reason to, if she just kind of flexes her absolute power against these free stronger characters because they got better focus, maybe that's why Richter goes to seek his grandfather. Maybe he already knows his grandfather is there. He just doesn't like him, but he needs to go to him so Grandpa can teach him how to work spells. I would actually also really like that, because I'd like the keep the idea that just because you're older doesn't mean you're not powerful, but maybe there's another reason. Maybe Jost could be more heavily injured. Maybe that's the reason he didn't help Richter as a kid and go with his daughter. Maybe that's why, because him being that way in the series just rubs me the wrong way. Don't get me wrong, I love the badass old person in anime. I want to keep that, and I would have Jost be that eventually, but I need a more concrete reason as to why he's not actively helping. And the way he'd actively help here would be to train Richter into, magical arts. I also wouldn't have Richter being able to do magic as a kid, because why would he? I need him to train from here and start unlocking that power. Or he's always been doing it, but he needs to go to Jost to fully unlock the ability with time and training, at least 2 episodes. So, and again, I wouldn't say that he'd be ultra powerful. I just think it'd be more interesting if he just mixes it with martial combat, which we've never really seen before. So, and then I keep the majority of it the same. I want Orlox to kind of switch to being a good guy. I might make that a bit more prominent, but again, with second season, that might not be what they're aiming for. It should be, but it might not be. Keep Mitsak changing sides. I might expand a little bit more on him, because his changing sides is really cool to me. He just doesn't get a lot, so him and Orlox would probably have a higher prevalence in this version, which we could do because, we've focused on the free main characters quite a bit in the first 3 episodes, so they don't need super long-winded talks throughout the rest of the episodes to establish character. And then just keep the ending. They fail to stop Elizabeth Foy's ultimate plan, and Alucard wakes up and comes in and saves them, and now we're rallying for what comes next. So I think that's the best way to fix the series. Could some of this be amended in the next season? There's a possibility of it. They could do some of this stuff. Will they? Hard to tell. They clearly had some issues with this season, so we'll see how they deal with audience feedback and general ideas in the next one. But why don't you guys let me know what you would do to fix this series, and tell me in the comments. All right, bye.